My name is Guy. I'm German, but also Israeli. I have two passports. This is a big part of today's session. I'll tell you a little bit of my story. I have two little boys. I'm a professor for international management. This is why I'm here today as well. I consult quite a few companies like yourself today, and I've started in the Israeli army as a trainer in the international unit, and I've studied here in Germany actually till I got my PhD in intercultural management. Today I work both at university and with consulting, but it's not about me today, it's actually about you. So I'm moving back here, and I would like to tell you the things that we will speak about today in our little session. And so the main topic is you and your relocation, and that relocation either has happened already or hasn't started yet. And I would like to start with my own story very, very shortly, and then we'll go to the data I collected on your survey. So when I was 8, my father got an offer here in Munich to move to Germany. And obviously he took, for the same reasons that you guys wanted to move abroad. They wanted to make good money. They wanted to see the world. They want their kids to have a great education. We went to an international school, and so on and so forth. And I was 8, and that was the first out of 3 relocations I had in my life. Because the first relocation was to Germany when I was 8. But actually, there was also a second relocation 4 years later when I came back home to Israel. And this is the one relocation that I call the mystical, the secret relocation that nobody really ever talks about. Because you can imagine that you're for little children going back home, for example, to Russia after 2, 3, 4, 5 years in Germany is a big deal. Maybe the Russian isn't so great. My Hebrew was really bad. I mean, I could speak it, but I could hardly write it. That was super tough. And then I come back to Israel, and I'm called the German kid, me, who was the Israeli kid here. And then the third relocation I did was the one that I decided to do consciously, this time as an adult, when I was 22, to come study in Germany. So what I want to say, and I want to start with this because it's just so important, is that the maybe most important thing in your relocation, and it doesn't matter where you're coming from or where you're going to, is that one thing, and you'll see you haven't really mentioned it, at least many of you haven't, is the one most important thing, I think, for most of us, at least when we have them, and it's your children. You see, my parents are well-educated people, and they prepared for the relocation. I remember I was 8, but I remember them, I don't know, selling the car, and I remember them looking for an apartment and talking about it, and talking about changing money and all kinds of stuff like that, but nobody really talked to us and talk to your children. It's not very complicated, actually, but they have to be prepared. And I don't just mean about give them German classes. Sure, that could help too, but really talk to them about what's going to happen, why it's happening, why it's good for them. Nobody talked to us. And you know what the result was? And again, my parents are great people, educated, all that stuff. What happened was, and I'll never forget it, is that I went into hospital here the day we came. And it was, turned out later, completely psychosomatic. I had the biggest belly pains I've ever had in my life, but it was completely psychological. I was just scared. And again, it was found out years later because they didn't find out anything. I was completely fine physically, but I was for 2 weeks in Munich, my first 2 weeks in a German hospital, which was absolutely horrible. And I believe it is because I wasn't prepared. And I went to an English class and so on before that in Israel, but I wasn't prepared. I didn't know what's going to happen. I was just a scared 8-year-old kid. And I think this is probably the most important point of this afternoon. Talk to your children, prepare your children. Now, this sounds really, really negative. To go back to the positive side of things, about a week after I finished that hospital visit, again, I didn't really have anything. It was completely psychosomatic. I went to school, my new school, and within 2 or 3 months, I spoke the language. I was super happy. These were the best years of my life. So everything is great, but the especially challenging times are those first days, weeks, maybe months, until you get used to things, especially for these little and so important parts of our families. So I'll get back to the children a little bit later, But I wanted to share this with you because it changed me for the good. I'm still here today in Germany, but I'll also never forget, let's say, the negative sides. Now, from my experience, I would like to go back to your experience. I'll just check in here the Slack. Okay, we're good. And sort of show you what you guys worry about, which I think is super important. So, we did this little survey. Now you should be seeing my PowerPoint presentation. And in the survey, whoops, that was not what I wanted to do. Okay, we had 56 responses, which is maybe around about a half of the people who were interested in this little workshop. And let me show you what we learned from the survey, and then we'll use it to speak a little bit about the relocation challenge. So, first question was where you live, and we have most of you living in Russia and Germany, actually the absolute main part of this group obviously here today. And then a couple of you live in the Netherlands, USA, Czech Republic, and we also have, I believe, one person from Sweden and one person from Spain. So after seeing this, I decided to concentrate on Europe for today. But if you want to ask any specific questions, even to the USA, I believe I'll be able to answer them. So this is a bit of who you are. Then we have you ever moved abroad for an extended time? It's about 50-50 here. Not about, it's exactly 50-50 here, which is interesting because that means some of you have some more experience than others. Maybe a short tip here, I'm writing it on the flip chart. We're going to have a few C's here, but the next point, one of the next points that I'm going to mention later on is the support of colleagues. We know as a fact scientifically that especially in these first few months, weeks, that the colleagues are an extremely big help in relocation. I'll also show you why scientifically a bit later, but if I'm looking at this slide here, I think, at least every second one of you has already gone through this. And even if it's just a little tip on, I don't know, where to go to the best supermarket or which one has the best meat or something like that. These are important questions that, you have already from the first days. Just ask a colleague. I think that this could be really beneficial. All right, but then we go to the more, let's say, detailed questions. Check this one out. So if I look at your main motivations, super interesting, starting from the yellow and the blues. What is this? 80% of you want to improve the quality of their life. More than a couple, 60% want to broaden their horizons or political reasons, which is a very high number for that. I think I know where the people live who say that, unfortunately, but I can completely understand it. Then we have leave my comfort zone, about 20% who want to challenge themselves. Just a couple speak about future promotion at work. Interesting. So I'm happy actually to see that because I do believe and know that intrinsic motivation, so a true motivation that has nothing to do, let's say, with money directly at least, is has the better chances of being successful. And then we have a few other interesting ones. I wrote them here in the bottom, did some copy pasting. So learning the language, joining the partner. I like this one, find and marry attractive guy from Europe. So that's definitely my favorite answer in the entire survey. Hey, but I don't know where you're from, lady or gentleman, but I believe there's attractive guys in other places in the world too. Anyway, okay, this is for another lecture. And better ecology and easier traveling was one more thing that you mentioned. I'll just show you the next slide so that I can switch back to the camera to speak about this for a little bit. So I hope you have this one here screenshotted or something. We'll send you the presentation later, by the way, so don't worry, you'll get this. And the next one is also super interesting. What are your main challenges for moving abroad? And you can see making new friends is something that worries most of you, after which comes the language and the culture. And only about 10% or less are worried about work-related challenges. The other ones, sorry for all this text, because I just copy-pasted, and I thought this was also super interesting, talked about two things, that one I would never have guessed, and one I completely understand. So the one that I was guessing that should come up was this one here. So separation from family, leaving parents at home, that kind of thing, or finding a way to moving them to a new country. Maybe not to forget this point, without being a big lawyer, I can tell you that you can sponsor your old parents in specific cases and bring them with you. But of course, this has to be checked individually. It depends on financial things. But I did it. So my parents live here now, and it's definitely possible to bring your parents here. You just need to take care of that. It's not simple, but it's possible. And the second thing that I thought was super interesting was the more expensive cost of living. Actually, this came a few times. So obviously it costs more to live in Munich than in St. Petersburg or something like that. But I would have never guessed this is an issue, because usually people move abroad like to make a little bit more money, but they don't worry much about the cost of living. So I guess you still want to save a bit when you come here, and you're absolutely right.
Do you have distribution, like how many of those were actually moved?
Half, 50-50.
Have this issue, because I feel there should be correlation. It's one of the fears of people who are about to move, and I don't feel like it is very.
It's not necessarily true. Is that what you're saying?
It's not necessarily true among those who are actually moved.
Okay, cool. So
it's true. It's not that big issue.
I will repeat it to those listening in. So the question was whether I have the distribution. No, I don't. Who answered this question? Those who moved or those who didn't move yet? And I don't have the distribution, but the comment here is that the gentleman thinks it's a ungrounded worry, because
I think there is a correlation. It's not like when you move, it's not that important issue comparing, say, for language or culture.
Aha, so after you moved, it's not that much of a problem anymore, like the others. Well, if you look at them, it's only 10%, and this is altogether the 10% of all these comments. So it's maybe 1 or 2% who said that to begin with, right? So compared to the other things, you're right, it's very, very minimal, yeah. Okay, so I hope you have those in mind. I'll just switch the camera back on so I can sort of start talking about them. Okay, so going back to the motivations to move. Now, most of you talked about broadening horizons, improving quality of life, and the political reasons, and of course, new or better chances for my kids. And here's something that is super interesting, that one more time going back, and this is the final time, going back to the kids, your kids, after a specific amount of time, and this is approximately 2 to 5 years, of course, it depends on the situation, they develop a very interesting phenomenon called TCK. And you can read up on it later on if you're interested in this. But basically what happens is, and this is what happened to me, you see your kids who may be, for example, Russian, and they're at a young age moving to Germany, after living here for 2 to 4 years or so, they develop a so-called third culture. It's something in between. They're not Russian, but they're not German. I mean, of course they're Russian, they have a Russian passport maybe, but they develop into some kind of hybrid mix of these two cultures. It's like a third culture that's a little bit in between. Now, there's a lot of interesting facts about these kids later on in life. There's quite a lot of research done about them. Many of it comes from diplomat kids and military kids and stuff like that. And we see that third culture kids, on the positive side, are very successful later on. Many of them have high earning jobs and are independent, own businesses, startups, and stuff like that. High IQs, high cultural awareness, obviously, and things like that. But there's also a but, unfortunately. And again, to finish this point with the kids, third culture kids are also some of the most depressed people later on in life. And ones having adaptation issues, and even the rates of suicide are higher. This has to be said according to research. Why? Getting back to my story from before, because they're confused. Because in Germany they're Russians, and in Russia they're Germans, and they don't feel belonging anywhere, but on the other hand they belong everywhere because they speak the languages and so on. So this is a very interesting thing for these kids. And again, and by this I finish with the kids, please, please, please prepare your kids for relocation before doing so. Leaving the kids, speaking about your other motivations. You spoke about broaden your horizons, improving the quality of life, and then the political reasons. Does anybody know here or in Slack what is the #1 reason in the world of relocations for a relocation to go bad, which usually means that you go back home, like to abort a relocation? So you're supposed to do 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, but you move before. Please give me your guesses. Feel free to write it in the chat. The #1 reason in the world to go back home, according to science. Sorry?
Shall we write down the question?
Sure, please. Feel free, yeah. What is the #1 reason to abort a relocation? You guys can just shout it. What do you think?
Quality of life.
Quality of life? So it didn't improve and then you go back?
It gets worse.
It got worse, okay. All right.
Maybe parents?
Parents?
Family.
Family, okay. Getting close, getting close. I guess it's connected to quality of life too, yeah? You guys, any idea? What is the #1 reason for relocations to go bad? I'll wait for some answers from here. You're typing it, Anna?
Like kids revolting and wanting to go back?
Almost. So the answer was kids revolting and wanted to go back. Let's see if somebody from our online group, there's supposed to be, 45 people in there, I guess? Or up to 45 people? We're getting some answers. There we go. I'll check them here. Less social ties, friends and family, money. Yeah, all of you saying family are close. Try to focus on the family part. What else could it be? It wasn't said before.
The spouse.
Yes, the spouse. It's actually unbelievable, but 80% fail because of the spouse. It's usually the wife, by the way, because most relocations are done by men, but 80% fail because of the spouse, which is an absolute crazy number. Because a little bit like the children, you think about everything, right? You think about the car and the job and the money and the house and the apartment and blah, 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 blah. But you don't think about your spouse who's here and sitting at home and has no friends and nothing to do and blah, 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 blah. This is super duper important. But by the way, this was the reason why we invited the spouses to join us today. I don't know which of you has his or her spouse here, but I know this will be recorded. So feel free to show them this and to talk not just to the children, but also to your spouse about this and show them this video. They should prepare just as much as you. You know what? Maybe even more. Because going back to the colleagues, you have them. And the spouse does not have them, usually, in most cases, unless they also find a job here. So yeah, these are sort of all the things that you should know before the relocation. Now, maybe one more general thing coming from me before going a little bit into the, let's call it the theory and science of relocations. Excuse me, and that would be time. I'm here for the last 16 years in Munich, and I told you I was already here as a kid, which means I speak the language and so on and so forth. But I can tell you that it took me, I don't want to say an exact number because there's no exact number, but maybe 8 to 10 years to feel completely integrated. Like to have German friends and to be invited to, let's call it German parties and stuff like that. 8 to 10 years. It didn't take a year, it didn't take 2 years, not even 5 years. And I went to university here. And even at university, I felt like I was maybe making connections to 1 or 2 people from my class. Everybody else was in their little groups, German groups, and I did not feel connected. So what I'm trying to say, and this is sort of the last general tip, these things take a heck lot of time, really. It's not going to happen in a month, and also probably not in a year or 2. To really feel integrated, to really feel good, really takes a lot of time. And this is, again, why we need to be prepared. We need to prepare the spouse, the kids, but we need to work a lot with our colleagues. And I'll show you scientifically why this is actually the only way to get through those first years. This is what I did too. First few years, I was hanging around with the people who worked for me, most of which were Israelis, which is fine because this is my culture, right? This is what I feel, let's say, welcome and happy in my language and so on. So these are the general facts that you should all know. They're super important, and I think not many people speak about them, unfortunately. But this is why we're here today. So now I want to show you some science. Being a professor for international management, I just cannot help it, right? So I will start with a small but super nice old video. Let me make this full screen. And no, that's not what I wanted. This is not the full screen I wanted, never mind. Leave it like this. Okay.
In some Asian cities, it's considered acceptable for a commuter to fall asleep on the shoulder of a stranger. In New York, it's quite a different story. Of course, you could always adapt. We're the global bank that never underestimates the importance of local knowledge. HSBC, the world's local bank.
Okay, so this is a super old commercial from HSBC. It's actually from 2007, I think, something like that. And I think what's really interesting about it is that a few things, but as a company, as a giant company, they were one of the first and only companies to realize how much these cultural, let's call them problems, are important. And that things that seem weird to us, like falling asleep on someone's shoulders, which you'd never ever do in New York, is actually not that bad of an idea. And they're talking about being the bank that understands this. So we help you understand the culture and so on and so forth. So I think what we can learn from it are two things. First of all, a company needs to understand these challenges. And I think you guys do. This is why I'm here today, which is super nice. Not many companies get this. Not many companies understand that, hey, 80% fails because of the spouses. So maybe we need to do something about it to begin with, to try to eliminate that, or at least reduce it. But going back to what we're here for today, for your own job, let's say, is that you need to understand that cultural differences, and this is what I'm going to show you, start from a point that the human is extremely self-centered. Every human being in the world, and it doesn't matter where we come from, who we are, blah, 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 man, woman, old, young, believes that what he or she knows is the right way to do things. The way I learned it is the right way. And everything else is weird and funny and why the heck and what the hell is wrong with them and so on. And if you understand this, that we're all human-centric or self-centric or whatever, then we have a chance to change it. We need to open up and understand that, well, sometimes it's actually not that bad idea if I could sleep on somebody's shoulder in the subway train. Although in Corona times, I'm not sure that is a good idea anymore. But as a concept, of course, that's a cool idea. So I would like to speak to you about a couple of things. I want to show you one model of culture, which is super easy to use. Which means you can use it immediately after this. And I'll give you a few examples of why it works, I believe. I would like to speak about diversity very shortly after that, on the advantages on working in an intercultural team, and it doesn't matter where you do that. And then we finish with intercultural communications, which is not just about communication itself, but where do we have some sources of misunderstandings, what can we do about it? And most importantly, and that will be the last part for today before your questions, how can we succeed anyway, although it's not that simple sometimes. So starting with Hofstede, and this one here, if you Google his name, he has a free website where you can check the things out. I'll show you in a second how to do it. Gert Hofstede is a Dutch researcher. He changed and pretty much made up the science of intercultural management. So he brought culture into business, probably for the first time in a big scale, starting from the 60s. And I know many of you guys are programmers, so you're going to love his definition of culture. It's my absolute favorite definition of culture. He compares culture to the collective programming of the mind distinguishing the members of one group from another. Now, this has to be understood. Basically, what he says, he likes to work with the terms hardware and software, like you guys do. And he says that human beings, when they're born, they're hardware, but empty hardware. It's like an empty hard drive. And so throughout our childhood, we are programmed by our parents and neighbors and grandparents and language that we hear on the TV and all that stuff. And basically over our childhood, this becomes our code that moves us and again tells us later on, this is okay, this is not okay. This you should do, this you shouldn't do. So we all know if I took a kid from Africa, a baby from Africa, and I put him in Germany somewhere, he may be black or she may be black, but obviously they will become German. And this is because the culture, the programming, the software, let's say, is a German software. So I think it's a really cool definition and it helps us understand that it's a process, but also it's very hard to delete. I don't know if you can format human beings. As far as I know, it's a bit tough, but you cannot remake the software. It's a one-time process and it stays that way over your life. And going back to what I said before about the children, the third culture kids, TCKs, it's exactly what happens to them. Because they're programmed in a second country in those important years of their education, you have a programming that is mixed, basically. And that's what's confusing on the one hand, but also advantageous on the other hand. So yeah, like the slide says, culture is learned. It's also transmitted from one generation to the other. It is symbolic, which means we use symbols to say what works and what doesn't work. It's all kinds of symbols. It can be human being symbols like Schumacher or Putin or Trump, but it can also be actual symbols like BMW and Lada and Ford. If I take cars for an example, yeah? You don't like the Lada example? Or anyway, but these are symbols, right? And we connect them automatically to a specific culture. That's exactly the thing. They are dynamic though. So cultures do change, especially through globalization. So I always like to say that the Germans used to be much more German about 20 years ago. If you look at older generation, there are much more of those stereotypes. We'll speak about that later. And probably the Russians used to be much more Russian and the Americans and so on and so forth. And I told you this before, and this is so important, cultures are so ethnocentric. We all believe we are the best, we know the best, our thing is the right thing, and so on. And we always need to remind ourselves that the person sitting in front of us, no matter where they come from and who they are thinking about the same thing. I want to show you how to use Hofstede really fast, just so that you know where to look for. So basically, if you just Google Hofstede compare countries, it comes right up and it's really cool. It's free and you can compare pretty much any country in the world. He has 6 dimensions that he uses to compare the countries. I will not go into detail about them. You can read it all in here, but if we, for example, take Germany, United States, and Russia, you can see these are the 6 scores. And then you can really see the differences between them here at the bottom. If we take one example for you to understand how Hofstede compares culture, for example, power distance is a really cool example. Power distance is the level of hierarchy in a way, so the level of distance between powerful and not so powerful people in a society. It could be a teacher and student, it could be a professor and a student, but it could also be a parent and a child. And you can see if we take these 3 countries, the power distance in Russia is extremely high compared to Germany and the United States. So this means there's a lot more hierarchy in the organization or at university or even at home. That what your mama says you should do in Russia, but in Germany, I'm not so sure that's always the case. And these things are really important because this means that you will see German kids, for example, and how they speak to their mothers. I'm just taking this as one example here, yeah? And you'll be baffled if you come from Russia. It will be the weirdest thing in the world. But of course, there's no black and white. There's no advantages or disadvantages. It's just how the way it is. So you can read all about these here. I just wanted to show you how you find this information because it's very easy to educate yourself about cultural differences, even if you're going to vacation somewhere. It doesn't have to be for a big relocation. But coming back to Hofstede, Hofstede said another interesting thing for us, and he doesn't only speak about the national culture, so you can see that somewhere here, but he says there's many more cultures actually. First of all, we live in a global world. There are some things that are already global, like how to send an email or stuff like that. But what's super important is your company culture. It's right here. And in a company culture or using the company culture, it's very easy or comparatively easy to overcome differences that you may have in the country culture. So basically with a strong company culture, and from what I saw so far, I think you have one, I believe, it is actually quite easy to overcome some of the challenges that come from the new country that you live in. Okay, there's also industry culture, so this would be the IT industry, software industry, and so on. And then you have in the company, even you could have group cultures in different teams, for example, stuff like that. But the reason I wanted to show you this picture is, again, to remind you what I wrote after the children. I wrote colleagues, and to remind you that the company can and should be the main source to overcome any problems you could have. And you will have some problems in the beginning, especially, and we said it takes time. A few other cool things from Hofstede. I brought an example for you. So here's a software example from United States and Russia. Brenda says, I've heard there's a new version of the software, the program we use in our accounting system. Andre says, but the program we have works quite well. Brenda says, I know, but this one's bound to be better. I think I'll order it and look it over. And Andre says, we're all quite used to this program. It can't hurt to check the new one out. And Andre says, why do you say that? Yeah. So he's very fixed in his opinion. What works, works. And she's trying new things. And this basically points to one of the dimensions that Hofstede speaks about. Specifically, this is about pragmatism, about how you live the today or live the tomorrow, and things like that. And this is, both answers are okay. I mean, they're both right. And this is the thing with culture. There's nothing wrong with the program, but there's nothing wrong with trying a new program. And if we manage to somehow open our minds to that what the other is saying has a reason, a cultural reason maybe, that's the right way to go. A few other cool examples. This one is about individualism and collectivism. One of the main subjects of Hofstede's and others' research. You see some societies are more individualistic, like on the left side, which means families are smaller, which means I'm focusing on my own career and on me, and me. And where other cultures, here we have the Chinese as an example, are more collectivistic, which means the bigger family, the group, the tribe. In India, it's the castes, things like that, are more important than the individual. So what you do for the bigger, let's call it, group. And again, both are okay. It's okay to optimize yourself, and it's completely understandable, but it's also okay to optimize your family. And there's reasons for both that I will not get into, and there's historic and geographic reasons why this is. But then going back to you, and most of you work in Europe, look at this. Even Europe, so we don't have to go all the way to China or the United States, is completely different when it comes to individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. And I think this map is just amazing because it shows us really how different these countries are. So the blue is individualistic or very individualistic, and the red is collectivistic. By the way, collectivism and communism are often very much connected because the group is very important, or used to be. And you can see some super interesting things. So many of you work here in Germany and also the Netherlands. These were the main answers we had, right? In any case, if you look at Germany, Germany is completely shifting from the northwestern side, which is extremely individualistic. You can really see how England radiates that. It's also connected to capitalism, status, stuff like that. Whereas southeastern Germany, where we are here now, yeah, it's still individualistic, but much less. So the family gains, for example, more important for southern Germans than it does for northern Germans. Netherlands, also example of a small country, a good example for a small country which is on the ocean or actually on the sea. Also individualistic, very much globalized influence there, maybe almost British influence. People are very concentrated on themselves. And did I forget any country people here work in? Yeah, there was one, Spain, US, Czech Republic, Spain and Sweden, right? Yeah. Spain and Sweden. So yeah, the Nordic countries are actually super interesting. If you go to Hofstede's page I showed you before and you check them up, yes, they're pretty individualistic. They're blue, as you see here. But on the other hand, they're very different from the other countries in Western Europe. So I can tell you, the colleague or colleagues going or wanting to go to Sweden is that they're extremely less status-oriented than we are here in Western Europe. So they care less about status, but much more about the environment, harmony, work-life balance, stuff like that. Whereas the German prefers to work hard, make money, and buy a big BMW or something like that. And then we had Czech Republic. Maybe that's a cool example. You can see really nicely in the Czech Republic example, which is right over here, how it's already moving towards the collectivistic part. So the group is more important. The more you move east towards Russia, for example, and the east, let's call it, but also southern countries like Africa, warm countries, are often more family-oriented, group-oriented, and so on and so forth. Does anybody have any questions, or are we so far good? Can you see, Anna? Is there anything in the Slack?
No.
No questions? You guys feel free, yeah? Okay, another thing I would like to show you, this is also something that many people like to see. Maybe I'll make it a bit bigger. This here is the amount of hours per week people work. Now, watch this one out though, because it doesn't mean they're very productive if they work more. It just means they work more hours, that it's connected again to status and stuff like that. And I think this is super interesting because there are many very interesting examples here. So for example, the Swedish, they don't work that much. It's quite a light red with 30 hours per week or 31 on average. I think they deducted vacation days and so on. Netherlands, Norway, even less, 27 hours per week. And then we have us here in Germany, 27 per week as well. Also, the Germans don't work so hard. And the reason I think this doesn't mean anything is that the Greek work the most per week. But I don't know what they do in that time because, well, it didn't really pay out so far. They work 41 hours per week, just like the South Koreans, or almost like the South Koreans, with 44 hours per week. So again, cultural differences also mean different work attitudes, if I may call it like that. And this means that in Germany, you could be looked at weirdly, actually, if you work too much, if you don't go home in time, in some cases and some examples. So just another interesting thing to look at. So what does this all mean for you? And yes, it's tough, and I spoke about spouses and children and 80% failures and stuff like that. Well, it means that per default, when you go on a relocation, again, especially in those first days and first months, it's going to be tough as heck. It's going to be tough on the one hand, but there's a lot of advantages that I want to speak about in the next few minutes. But before that, I know that your company is doing a lot to help you with that relocation, moving, finding an apartment, even stuff like doctor's appointment can get very, very frustrating with the German health system, for example. And so it's very frustrating in the beginning. And again, remember your spouse and remember your children. And some of you may know the 5 steps of grief when somebody dies. This is a similar one, but a bit more positive at the end. These are the 5 steps of diversity awareness. So basically, getting used to work in and with people from other cultures, or other diversity in general. It could also be working with people who are, I don't know, handicapped or blind, or women, men, and so on. So younger, older, any diversity out there. And in the beginning, and I remind you one more time, we're very culture-centric. Remember, we're programmed this way. We can't help it. So what is going to happen to you, for sure, that one time you go to the supermarket and somebody speaks to you weirdly, or what happens to many of my friends when they come to Germany every single time, it's the funniest thing, when they walk on a bicycle lane and people almost kill them for walking on a bicycle lane. You think everybody is crazy here. But at some point, you actually understand that's not such a bad thing, right? Because that means you can ride freely and fast on your bike, and you want to do it yourself, and then you find yourself starting screaming at people yourself. This is when you understand you're integrated. In any case, there's denial because it's weird, because it's natural, because I don't know it, because I'm not used to it. And why the heck should somebody scream at me for walking on a bike lane? This is the first step. The second step is defense. You start to explain yourself, yeah, why does it make sense? Why am I better? Why shouldn't it be this way? And so on. But then at some point, and this takes time, and this takes practice, and this definitely takes openness, the next step, and it's a hard one, and sometimes you need some help with this, is minimizing differences. You say, okay, I believe A, you believe B, let's try to make a C out of that. There's that nice sentence in English, right? Let's agree to disagree kind of thing. It's something on those lines. And this is already a pretty good sign that you're on your way somewhere good, and it takes time. At some point, we adapt to each other and from each other. And yes, the last step is the full integration into a country that we live in. I think aiming for minimizing differences is a beginning. Maybe for adaptation is already a lot to aim for. The full integration, I told you, at least in my example, it can take many, many years. But even to know what to say and not to say, so the adaptation, I believe, is something that is more than beneficial at some point to get to. So this is sort of how it works, and this is the steps you're going to probably walk through. And you need to imagine, let's say you're coming to work here, and you were sent from a company, from your company, and you were helped and so on and so forth. These same 5 steps your children have to go through, your spouses have to go through, and hey, if you're bringing your parents with you or you want to, maybe they have to go through it as well. So it's a different pace for every person and every, let's call it, position in the family. And the problem is, and we get back to the advantage of having colleagues. I told you we need to use our colleagues, and we should use our colleagues because they know how to make an appointment to the doctor and so on. The problem that often happens is that you're already minimizing the differences, and you're adapting because you get help at work, because you have colleagues and you're feeling comfortable or more comfortable, but your spouse is still in the denial stage or the defense stage. They don't have this help. They're sitting at home alone, right? And this is exactly what's the problem. You're already happy. You're like, oh, it's cool here. I like it here. I'm getting used to it, blah, blah, blah. You're not really getting used to it. You're just getting more help to go up the ladder faster, maybe, than your spouses. And this is where the problems could happen. Okay, so this is sort of what it looks like for us all when we move abroad, or just when we work with people from other countries. Let's speak a little bit about communication, sort of to try to see what we can do about this. And some of the things I'm going to show you are actually not just relevant for German integration or Dutch integration, but actually for communication with any human being. For example, with your wife, as this first example shows. Married couple sitting in a car, stopped at a red light. The wife is driving. When the light turns green, the man says to her, "Dear, look ahead, it's green." Her answer, "Who's driving, you or me?" A typical example from married life. And this is exactly what happens, or what could happen, because we cannot read minds. Maybe he really just wanted to tell her, hey, maybe you didn't see the light is green, but she, of course, takes everything out on him from the last years or whatever and says, who's driving, you or me, and you think you know to drive better than me, blah, blah, blah. And this thing can turn into a divorce if it gets really, really bad, right? So it's crazy, but the smallest things, right? The smallest things, because we're human beings in communication, they can really, really escalate, let's say, and not necessarily for the right reasons. And I would like to show you a little model for this, very famous one. You see it at the bottom from Schulz von Thun. Again, feel free to read about this. It's very famous. It's called the 4-ear model. But before going into the model itself, what happens is that in any communication, we want to send some kind of message. And we encode it. We encode it with our words, but we also encode it with our body language, with our voice, with the way we stand, and so on and so forth. And so the coding can be very different from person to person, from message to message, and sometimes even from morning to evening. And so in coding, we can already have some issues somewhere over here. Then we have the message, and the message comes to a receiver, and then the receiver has to decode it. And again, because we're human beings, the decoding depends on who is telling us this, what's our relationship, what time of the day it is, am I tired, am I working, and so on and so forth. So again, we can have some problems while decoding it here. And this is all called noise. It's communication noise. Now, the problem is, we know as a fact that we're not always very good at communicating, even in our mother language. Like we just showed, even the husband and wife who are supposed to know each other so well, right? They have problems because she's already screaming at him and he just wanted to tell her the light is green. That is because of the noise. And the noise is our relationship and our history together and so on and so forth. The problem is with culture, it adds to the noise. It gives much more noise. It's way harder. Now I maybe don't even understand the language well, or the facial language, or the body language, or anything of that combination. So basically, it gives us even more noise. And then often the feedback, which should be given as well, is wrong or just not understood again from what we wanted to say. And for this, the four-ear model, this is how it's called by Schultz von Thun, one of its many names, was developed. And you can see that Schultz von Thun said, any message you give to anybody, by the way, in life has four sides or four ears, because we need to hear it four times. So that's why it's called the four-ear model. And I want to show you how it works. So the first ear is the factual ear, let's call it. This is really the data in the message. The facts, the data, without any emotions and any feelings. This is the only ear that stays the same, or should stay the same, between the sender and the receiver. If you just take the data in the message as if it was code, that's what comes out, just this one. The second ear, here the green one, is a self-revelation one. This is what we say about ourselves, our motives, our values, our emotions. This is basically the part of the message that puts our, let's call it, spice into it. I'll show you an example in just a second, but this is our part in the message. Then we have the relationship layer. This is about the relationship between the sender and the receiver, and what the sender thinks of the receiver, and how that is combined in the message. And last but not least is the appeal side of the message, and this is what the sender would like the receiver to do. It's like it's an appeal, so it's basically a wish or a command. I'll show you a cool example. Again, it's a husband and wife example because this is where many messages get kind of mixed up. So in this case, the man, he's the sender, and his wife, the receiver, are having dinner. She cooked it. The man says there's something green in the soup. And the woman answers, if you don't like the taste, you can cook yourself. So if we take this message, again, typical example, the fact is there's something green. And there is something green, so it stays the same for the sender and for the receiver, as you see here. In the self-revelation, he actually wanted to say, I don't know what it is, because I didn't cook it, but she understands from it, he feels uncomfortable because of the green. And this is already where the first problem is. He actually meant something completely different. The relationship, he meant, you should know what it is, because you cooked it, but he thinks my cooking is bad. And typical, right? And in the appeal is just please tell me what it is what he wanted to say, but she thinks he wants her to cook different stuff that he likes. And you can see, except for the facts, everything is completely misunderstood. And again, this is without cultural differences, this is with somebody you know, and it's already that hard. Now let me challenge everybody here, including the people in on the Slack. I will leave this open for a second and open it maybe here. So my question to you is, how can you overcome these challenges? We just learned the model, right? We can use the model to overcome the challenges. This is my tip for you. How can you overcome these challenges in the communication between the three actually last parts of the message? There is a way to do it. You guys, maybe?
Yeah, both of them should go to psychotherapy.
Well, that's the expensive and timely solution.
Is a late don't communicate or get analyze feedback.
Yeah, get feedback and analyze. Cool. And how do you do that? I mean, what should she have done before she said what she said?
What the fuck do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that? I'll leave the one word out. What do you mean by that? That is correct. One thing I can sort of give you, you know what? I'll just switch this off for 1 second. Somebody gave an answer. 1 second. Let's check those out before. Yep. Ask more questions. Yeah, start with your own language. It's true before moving abroad. And I want to give you one of the things that changed my life. For many of the things that I do, maybe I'll add it here in a different color.
I know another option.
Yes, please.
You can try to rephrase what the sender was saying, like the way you understood it.
Cool. Rephrasing is active listening, right? And rephrasing, did I understand you right that? And doing that. But it's all part of communicating well, and it's also asking a question. So it's all correct, you guys. I want to show you one technique I learned many years ago. This one, it comes from journalists and CIA interrogators. They both use it, so it must work, right? And it's a very simple technique. It's called 5W1H technique, in English anyway. 5W1H, I hope you can see it, are in generally all the forms of open questions in the English language. 5 W's, where, what, who, why, when, and H is how. And we know as a fact that by using open questions, and this is just not to forget any of them, that's why I like it, because I never forget a question this way. By using open questions, what do you mean by saying that, for example, like you said, we can get to the bottom of things if we do it properly. Literally, using open questions can solve us many, many problems. At home with the soup, but also at work with a team, especially when dealing with different cultures. So how would you like me to do it? When would you like me to do it? What do you exactly mean by I have to do this and that? Typical examples, yeah? Just use a lot of open questions, and then, yes, rephrase and see that you understand them correctly. This brings in the feedback loop. I know I'm saying this very quickly, but generally, use a ton of open questions. Anytime you think somebody is annoying you, harassing you, cursing you, doing something not okay, saying something, big chances are, especially with different cultures, that it's not true. Ask, and it really, really works quite well also with different teams. So this is the 5W1H technique, and if she would have asked, what would you like to know, or why are you saying this, or something like that, probably he would say, yeah, because I just don't know what it is. And that would have been it, and no divorce, and everything is great. So that's sort of very, very quickly about that.
A couple of answers.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't see. Let's see. Shorten the distance. Well, actually, Sergey, you should try to stay with the facts. So basically, ignore the other 3 years in the beginning, and then ask questions to see that you're not misunderstanding it. That's how to do it. So literally, I force myself. I remember this model well. I teach it quite many years, and I literally stay on the facts. Okay, she said something about green. Let's ask about the green. I'm putting everything else, not our relationship, not anything of that, and so on. And what else do we have here? Clearly state your intention. Yep, Maria, thank you for that. I want to ask about the green thing in the soup because I don't know what it is. Perfect question. Oh, that's a positive way to ask it, Maxime. I see something in the green suit. I'm curious what it is. Please tell me. So it's a very positive way.
Very passive aggressive.
Well, it depends on the wife and the relationship, right? I mean, cool. Guys, thank you. So remember, 5W1H. This is the trick for me.
It's a beautiful thing in the soup.
So, there we go. What's this beautiful green thing in the soup? Okay. Yeah, I want to tell you a little bit more about communication. So, again, I did the same mistake. You see, communication has actually 4 components. Oh, I didn't switch it back on, did I? No. Did I? I did switch it back. Cool. It has 4 components. It has what you actually say. This is the verbal part. But it also has a ton of non and parallel and extra verbal parts. So your facial expression, gesture, body language, eye contact, you can see all of these things, but also your voice, right? The volume, the pitch of the voice, if you laugh or not, pauses, accent, and then the extra verbal stuff, how you're dressed when you're saying it, in what context you're saying it, when you're saying it. I told you morning and evening sometimes has different meanings. And this is probably the one most cited, but I'm not sure how much scientifically proven it is, to be honest. Research, I'm having a problem saying this word, by Merabian about these components of cultural communication, because it's super hard to measure. That's why I'm super careful about it. Merabian says only about 7% of what we say is the actual words we use, and everything else is nonverbal or paraverbal or extraverbal. I don't know if it's that little, but it definitely affects the way we say things on how the message comes. If I'm open and happy and smiling, then if I'm super grumpy and...
Pre-texting error, right?
Sorry?
It is pre-texting error.
Yeah, the texting error, I have a lot to say about that, but especially emojis and things like that can really change communication between us, right? I even see you guys using it here. Yeah, this is 1981, so this is super old. But still, if I look at you like this and I say, you're an absolutely amazing guy, I don't know how much you'll believe me, It just doesn't work. You really have to show what you say. Otherwise, it doesn't come by as you want it to say. And this is the problem, guys. This is already the problem because different cultures have different body languages and different distances people stand from each other and stuff like that. I'll give you a few examples. So first of all, yes, nonverbal signals, super unstructured and super unconscious. We cannot really affect our body language. We have no chance. Even the best actors in the world, when they speak as their own selves, as a human being, have a hard time changing their body language. By the way, we're pretty good at reading body language, but that's actually a problem because we're reading it into our culture. I read body language maybe the Israeli way, but the German body language is different, so I'm probably reading it the wrong way, and already we have the issues again. We said they're important, at least as important as a verbal message, and sometimes they can really contradict the message, like the example I just did with you're an absolutely amazing guy, but I don't really show it. But if we're doing it right, they can also complement the conveyed message. Now, there's a few cool examples for this, which I think are also relevant for you. Smiling. For example, smiling has different meanings in different cultures. In Germany, it's a polite thing to do, but in Russia, according to research at least, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a binding thing. If I'm smiling to someone, it means I'm really with him and I'm really a part of this message. Sorry?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. So there's a really cool statistics about this. Americans smile 7 to 9 times more often than Russians. What do you think about that? Because it's just something you do in America, but in Russia you just do it when you have to do it and when you really want to connect. So, it could be weird for the German. Why is he not smiling? What's wrong with him and her? Now, please do not start smiling around in Germany because I told you to. Be you, but understand that the small thing like this can be a source of misunderstanding even, and we don't think about it. Smiling can be even morally interpreted. So in some cultures, smiling can be dishonest. So for these cultures, let's say smiling less, smiling too much could be like, why? What's wrong with this person? Like, why is he or she smiling so much? And a few people here like nodding and saying, yeah, that's true. And it's a tricky thing. But again, remember, this is your culture speaking now, and it probably doesn't mean what you think it means. So different cultures, different meanings. By the way, do you know how you can know if a smile is real or fake? Anybody? Just because we're talking about smile.
Hide the mouth. Close the mouth.
Some people smile with mouth, some people don't. Yeah, the eyes. Real smiles are with the eyes.
I mean, close the mouth so you see the...
Oh, to see the eyes. Okay, yeah. It's all about the eyes. So a real smile, it doesn't have anything to do with teeth, but it's with the eyes.
Maybe you could show it in the camera.
Oh, yeah. I'll show it again. 1 second. Thank you for the tip. So yeah, I said that real smiles are in the eyes, and somebody said you can just cover the mouth, and then you'll know if somebody's really smiling or not, like this. And a fake smile looks something like this. It's so weird to look at myself. Anyway, so when the smile is really smile with your eyes, it has nothing to do about this. Okay, a few other things which could be a source of misinterpretation and super important are taboo subject matters. You see, different cultures have different taboos, different things you should or should not talk about, which are super hard to identify, which change a bit over time. and it also depends who says it to who and at what situation and so on. And if your English is really good, by the way, it's sometimes against you because people then think you should know the other facts of the culture. So, for example, if you have perfect English but you've never left your country in your life, and you make a mistake, let's say, talking about a taboo you shouldn't speak about, people will be more offended than with somebody who doesn't speak good English, because that person should know because they speak good English, which is the weirdest thing, but it's just human again. If I'm thinking about Germany and maybe about Russia, when they come together, just because many of you are on this sort of Russian-German kind of place, I believe that World War II could be something on that line to speak about, not speak about, at least here in Germany. I'm not sure, can you think of other taboos here? Or in Russia? Taboos, things you shouldn't talk about? Help me. Any
It
ideas?
is generally considered that it's a taboo to speak about money.
Money, thank you, yes.
But not in my experience though.
So you don't find speaking about money with Germans is a problem?
No, I've simply never found that it's something that people don't like talking about.
Well, I can tell you, Germans...
Like a person, for example, won't tell you, I make this amount of money, how much are you making? No, it's not going to
But they will. In America, they will. In Germany, they won't.
Yeah, sure.
In America, they will.
They won't. But in a different way,
Yeah.
people are eager to signal how much money they're making by perhaps like talking about how much they're spending.
Yeah, sure.
From which you can.
So it depends if it's general money or how much I'm making, right? So,
No. I mean, like, yeah. So someone won't say like I make X,
never.
but they like I just bought this.
Okay, so to talk about what,
W, and so you can.
yeah, because that's a
die.
status symbol again, which connects
Yeah.
to that other part, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so people never shy.
Same in Russia?
People never shy away from like.
Okay. Well, like I said, Americans will come to you and say, "Hi, I'm Guy. I'm Republican. I make $200,000 a year, and I have prostate cancer," something like that. And you're like, "Whoa, so much information, right?" But in Germany, never, ever, ever. Anything taboo in Russia or for Russian culture, maybe?
Just,
I'll go to
one
the.
question.
Yeah, I'll open it up. Yeah. Taboo topic. Yeah, politics, salary, religion. I'll say something about that. World War II, correct. Politics, race, and gender issues. Yeah, and this is what I usually call the 3+1. The 3+1 things you should not talk about, at least in a business context, until you know somebody, are indeed politics, religion, and sex, which is gender, and usually financial trouble, we say. So you don't go to people saying, I don't know, I have problems, I don't have money, I don't have this. You can say, I bought a BMW, I guess, but the financial problem, people don't feel good. They don't know what to do with this information. David says you can speak about everything as long as it's phrased right. Yeah, but England is not an example for anything. Did you see that picture before? It was all blue. Just kidding, of course. Okay. Yeah, taboo topics. Anna gave me a cool example before. There's a cool joke. It reminded me of that. That a German moved to America and asked somebody to borrow their car, and the American said, "Yeah, sure, take my car." And then an American moves to Germany and asks the German to borrow his car, and the German says, "Never ever, take my wife, but leave my car alone." So saying that, it really, really depends. You talked about Russia and said lending money in Russia to friends is not a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And in Germany, you don't really ask people for money. And people, when going to restaurant here, you guys know it, they split the bill by the cent, right? I pay €2.75 and you pay €3.64, and then everything is correct. And this is something that is very special for Germany, just to have one other example. And these things are learned, right? Like it says here, it's very hard to identify them. Am I sharing my screen? Yes, okay. Cool. Just a few last things, you guys, and then I'm totally open for questions. And I did the same mistake once again. Okay. Form of address, I think, is super interesting. Those of you speaking German, Russian, French, not sure about Dutch, by the way, know that there is the official and unofficial way of address. In Germany, it's the du and the sie. but in English there is none, right? And it creates really weird situations in Germany where you talk to somebody in a business context here in German per Sie, so in the official form, but then you have an English meeting later, and with the same person you talk on a first name basis, because the Sie form comes with the last name and the Du form comes with the first name. I know the same happens in Russia, although I'm wondering, at work, do you talk with the official or non-official form with colleagues? I don't know, I'm asking.
Non-official.
Non-official, and with the boss?
Non-official with boss, non-official, but between the companies.
Between
or
companies.
Or with some officials.
What about super high boss, like CEO? Non-official, okay.
In our company, it's unofficial, but in many other companies,
It is official.
Yeah.
So it depends on the company. Then we have the company culture one more time.
We have like another level of it in Russia because we have this, you can address somebody with name and patronym.
Aha, so there's a third form in Russian,
It's like
basically.
it's often connected with this Z form.
Yeah.
But I mean, it sounds like what happens to you in school with this, you address a teacher with this, but
So-
later.
I'll just repeat. So in Russia, there's like something like a third form. It's like a Z form, but on a different.
No, it's like you use the first name and the patronym.
Oh, so the first name with the patronym
Yeah,
together.
and
So it's somewhere in between, I guess.
It's definitely more polite than the.
Just
the
last
you,
name, like
the du.
Mr.
But it's less. but
Less
it's
formal than the other one.
It's not, yeah, it's
Okay.
just more polite, but it's not formal.
It's very formal. You won't, I mean, if you say in Gazprom, you address all your.
Yeah, so this is company culture again, right? Big company, very hierarchical, small company,
State company or like.
or state, okay.
Formal company.
Corporate, yeah. And I think one more interesting thing that I find interesting is also this last one, the distance and body contact. Again, non-corona times here. I used to work at Munich Airport as a student, and once I had to, I'll never forget this, had to order buses to take passengers to the airplane. And I didn't know how many people fit in a bus to know how many buses we need. So I asked the bus driver, hey, how many people fit in a bus? And he says, it really depends. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if it's German businessmen on a Monday morning, maybe 40. No, they need a lot of space in their suitcase. And then he says, if it's a German family's flight going to Mallorca, Palma de Mallorca, maybe 60. If it's Chinese, it's 100. And this is the time I really learned that culture and body distance, let's say, really are connected together. Usually it's connected to the size of the country. So typically an American needs more space than a German. It also has something to do with temperature. Warmer countries, warmer cultures that stick more together than colder countries, colder cultures. So I'm guessing, I did not research this, that the Russian culture, for example, would need more space than the German one, at least maybe a little bit more, just because it's a huge country and it's a bit of a colder climate. Anyway, need to check this one out.
Do you know this example? This,
Arm length?
yes.
Nope,
So
tell us.
this
Supposed to do it in
Sweden
Germany.
And don't know countries, they need much more space than Spain and so on.
So Spain is up to the elbow. Okay, so Anna's showing us the arm. Wait, I'll show everybody. So Anna is saying, okay, the warm countries go up to here. This is how much space you need. And then the cold countries, like, I don't know, Sweden or whatever, they need the entire arm length, which is a meter. Actually, I don't know this one. Thanks. It's a cool one. Okay, one more time sharing my screen. Going to the end of my little presentation here and then on to you. Yeah, so distance, clothing, eye contact, voice, all these things really matter. And actually, they're super hard to do why can't you see my presentation now? 1 second, sorry about that. Now, I've lost my Google, sorry. Okay, here we go. So body distance, clothing, eye contact, voice, all these things matter, really matter, and they're very hard to do with other cultures because they're hard enough to do in our own cultures. I think sort of this wraps up this little part, and I want to sort of end this little workshop a bit positively. You see, working in an international group has many advantages, right? You're more innovative, we know that. You're more creative, productive. You can also hopefully benefit from group thinking, and you can learn from each other. But if it's not done well, which means if you're not prepared, if you're not really making thoughts of how to do it, or you just block, which is what I showed you can happen in the first two phases, then of course we have communication problems. The group doesn't stick together. Often we have the problem of the group turning into little groups. So for example, if I have 2 Russians and 3 Germans in a group, typically there will be subgroups in the group, which is not good for group cohesion. Sometimes people leave. Stress and costs are the bad sides. So what can we do is the last question. And obviously, I have no magic with me. Unfortunately, I can just show you scientifically what can be done, except for being prepared, which is what we spoke about before. First of all, we need to understand culture can be seen as a mathematical function, actually. Now, we know you guys are scientists, so what you can do, you can take any culture or any one thing about a culture, it's called a dimension, and basically put it under a standard distribution. For example, if this is a French culture, we can say that most French are somewhere over here. For example, if we check how much are they on time, I don't know, so most French are here, which means they're less on time than the Americans, which most of them are here. And so any culture can be seen as a normal distribution, and being a normal distribution, usually also because of globalization, they're not that far from each other, like you can see here, which means the green part is the common things we have between cultures. And usually there's quite a few common stuff between the cultures, even if they're very different, like the French and the American. However, what happens usually, though, at least in the beginning, when we start working or living in a different place, is, well, we focus on ourselves, like I showed you before, and then we get into the problem of stereotyping. I want to show you, mathematically speaking, what a stereotype looks like. Mathematically speaking, a stereotype is exactly that area of a culture that is most foreign and far away and weirdest for me. So if I'm French, I'm probably located somewhere here, because in the standard distribution of French, this is where all French people are. There are many kinds of French. There's some over here, but there's some even over here, which are very much American in their culture. But most French are here, so I'm also probably here. And then the first time I meet an American, or maybe I just saw a movie about Americans or something like that, the first thing that I will notice, because I'm here somewhere, are those things about the Americans that are most far away from who I am. And this, guys, is the area of stereotypes. This is what a stereotype looks like mathematically. So if I'm French, the first thing I'll say, and we all do it, and it's perfectly normal and okay, we just have to get out of it and remember this little picture, is that all Americans are naive, aggressive, undisciplined, and workaholic. But actually, I'm only describing a very small part of the Americans, this one here. I'm not describing the normal American. And the same thing for the American. If I'm an American, I'm located somewhere here, and the first thing I'll say about the French is those things that I see here at the end, which is maybe arrogant, flamboyant, hierarchical, and emotional. It's just an example, yeah? This is what a stereotype looks like from a scientific point of view. This is how it happens, but the good news is that there's much, much, much more common and positive between the cultures that can benefit us all when we work together than there is those stereotypes. It doesn't mean we won't do this. I still do it, and I know all the science. It doesn't matter. We do it because it's what we are. This is how we are programmed, right? But we have to always remember that by thinking that a German is A, B, C, D, or a Russian is E, F, G, H, we're only describing those parts of the culture that are weirdest, most far away, strangest to who we are and who we think the world should be like, which is just that self-centric approach we learned about in the beginning. So to finish this, I gave you one trick already with the 5W1H. We talked about the children. We talked about the colleagues. We talked about the spouses, and we talked about it all taking time. So it's all not that simple, right? But what can we do? And this is actually proven by science. What are the 4 things we can do? First thing, language adjustment and stylistic flexibility means speaking slowly. Sometimes it means texting instead of talking. It's actually a good thing when you don't speak the language well, because you can read it over, you can Google Translate it, I don't know, stuff like that. It's not a bad thing. I know many of you like to do it. And stylistic flexibility means basically this whole do-z issues, more hierarchical, less hierarchical, stuff like that. You really change a little bit your style. Doesn't mean you have to change what you write. It means you have to change how you write it, depending on where you are. The second thing, and this is general good in life and with colleagues, building of shared knowledge. We know as a fact, the more team building you do, for example, the more you go bowling, into a movie, into restaurants, into God knows where, with your new colleagues, the less problems you'll have in the team. It's actually as simple as that. It's the stupidest thing. Just meeting on the weekend, barbecuing, whatever. It really, really helps. These little jokes you have then, these little experiences, knowledge, that really, really helps you overcome cultural and intercultural gaps. You mentioned it before, thank you. Active listening, it connects to asking questions, looking people in the eye when possible, when we're actually talking, learning to be open. So basically knowing, okay, this happened to me now because I'm blocking, because it's a new culture, because it's weird, but it's normal, but I still need to somehow be open to it anyway. Maybe ask a question or two, maybe repeat what's said to see that I understood it right. We had that before, super, super important, and also quite helpful and not so hard, I believe. And last but not least, structuring and highlighting information. This means basically what's most important to you, say it's most important to you. And if it's in written form, put it in bold or in highlight or in parentheses or something like that. And if it's in spoken language, like I said already, say, hey, Anna, this specific point is really important to me. I want you to really, listen now, because I blah, blah, I, B, C, D, E. So really, even in speech, say this one thing is important. Please listen now, because that one thing you should really do. Because we know as a fact that when you're struggling with a language, for example, it's hard to know because of intonation problems. Languages have different intonations. Which part is now the important part? Because it sounds different when you highlight in Russian than when you highlight in English and when you highlight in German. So that's about that. And again, actually doing it per text is super easy. You can just put it in bold or in red or something like that, right? So that's the easiest part. Yeah, this was sort of my more scientific part that I really wanted to give you. Okay, this is me. If you have any more questions, but we will send you the slides, so feel free to contact anytime.